completing the archway unit that you did for the 3D modeling section. So if you hadn't completed it up to this point, you're going to start being in some problems. The week after spring break, the Wednesday in class right here, is a work period. I'd really strongly recommend that you all come here so that way we can work through any problems you have, because Vectorworks can be finicky.
After spring break?
Yes. Yep.
Finicky.
And then this assignment is due the week after spring break, or AOS for Spring Awakening.
Which we don't have class for.
No, we have class during AOS week for Spring Awakening. Musical. The next week we don't have class because Tori and I just assumed that we were both going to be a little toasty.
Like 90% of us are in this.
Yeah.
I'm not.
Those two aren't.
Cool. So
that stupid secret garden thing. What an idiot I was.
Well, I think you know the choices you made and what led you there. So when we get started, as we get started, here's what I kind of wanted to show off first. So this is the updated 3D master for Spring Awakening. And what I did right here is, if I actually just pull up this navigation pane, make it a little bigger, and then I'm going to cry because it's going to change everything. Actually, better yet. So here's how I kind of like to organize my layers in Vectorworks. So every single one of my scenic units is on its own layer and right here. So the idea of a 3D master is literally, it's a master drawing, and this is very similar to how it was done at Atomic. I stole it outright from how they organize things. So every one of these components on here is its own toggleable layer, and then it's drawn nowhere else in the document, which is very different from how I do it in AutoCAD, where my AutoCAD drawings are just this massive clusterfuck of things sketched out everywhere. But when you let Tori in, Megan?
I hear a little knock.
The water's fixed.
How was it misbehaving?
Somebody tried to put a roll in. There was a roll open that had a folded edge, and I was like, oh, I guess it's a good roll. Maybe somebody just opened it by accident. But the folded edge then caught on the thing and went, and like the whole thing.
Oh god, yeah.
And then I was like, ah!
That roll that's set up to the side was the one that Claire tried to plot something, and then it just spun out an entire roll instead of plotting anything.
Oh, did it? Well,
yeah.
I rolled it back up. It's good now.
Yep.
So.
Anyway. So
I thought you said the water
just because we've
fixed.
barely gotten started, any questions for Tori from the lighting? Cool. Alrighty, so like I was saying before, I just break this up into what I consider the units of the show, and I have each one on its own individual layer. So if I swap my layer options from show snap modified to just active only, and I need to modify any one of these units, this is how I toggle between them. And this is very similar to how it worked at Atomic, where the step above this was actually having a 0, point in the center of each one of these drawings. So that way the person who's in charge of manipulating the master file would just delete the old version of a file, copy paste from the new version from like an APM or a drafter, and then paste in place, and it would just instantly replace the parts of that unit in the same place as they are. I'm very big fan of doing it this way, namely because it helps us figure out where we've got some like geometry issues. In the original design for this show, this bookcase was actually over on this side, and the way Joe originally had it drafted is these two bookcases actually intersected with each other, the inside shelves of them, which would be a very easy thing to not catch if I hadn't gone through and actually drafted this all in 3D. So that's this helps out a lot when you start going into how this unit plates. The other thing that is important to note about how I manipulate this file is I've got it where this front edge of the stage is basically parallel with my XY axis in the model space in the drawing, which as I plate it, Vectorworks isn't good about detecting what I want to be like the front or the back or the left or the right side of it. It really just says this is always going to be the front, so if I have something that's on an angle, it plates really weirdly and I have to manipulate it. So that's some of the things I did. So let us discuss how I do viewports. So if I, actually.
Now, when you said everything's its own layer, you mean like things are the same layer?
So like
all paneling or all stairs are the same layer?
So it's all about how I'm dividing stuff up in my mind. I could, like, for example, Tori and I were just talking about this Matt Marcus on his sound plot, has every speaker on its own layer,
Oh, okay. So,
which there's a lot. There's a line to be drawn
Yeah.
because I could have every sheet of MDF and every little thing on its own layer, but
when you've got unlimited, when you've got
Yeah.
unlimited vellum.
and I think I've
You
got
got
12
2,000
elements is
layers.
what the show ended up at, which to me seems like a reasonable quantity.
Yeah.
You could ask Connor and Tori how easy this has been to work with, but like so in my mind the ceiling is its own thing.
Okay.
The main wall is
That's what I mean, so
it's-
it's not just.
Yep, its own thing. Each one of these platforms is their own thing, and then some of it is coalesced, and it really depends on how I'm thinking about plating this sort of stuff. So I have all my top MDF layer as just one layer, because as I'm thinking about how I'm drafting this show, I want the MDF to be all just plated at the same time. I'm not thinking of this MDF as parts of other units in the show. It's
Right.
really a unit in and of itself, but you can see I've still got the MDF on these guys because they're their own thing. And then I've also got like all my platforms are one layer, but I keep the stud platforms, yada yada yada. And there's no hard and fast way of deciding what consists of an element or not.
Yeah.
Which is funny because at Atomic, like for the Moon Man, which I've never shut up about, the Moon Man only had 3 elements as far as Atomic was concerned: the platform, the Moon Man, and a skirt that went around the platform. But as we went through it, we discovered that we needed to add some parts of the Moon Man. Brian, sorry to leave you hanging. What's
No,
up?
you're fine.
Is
So-
it more of an extension?
Do you, I guess, class each thing within, is there a way to class within class that you can keep everything MDF or, plywood or whatever, but still have it in the section that you want it? Does that make sense?
So yeah, so these are my design layers, and then my classes are broken up in between
Oh, okay.
that.
It's
So
just
like,
a little hard to see on the-
yes, it's even, it's murky in there. But I mean, if I want to make this super specific, let me just look at my 4-step unit, and I'm going to swap to only active layer. But I've got, so the MDF is the MDF class, the plywood is the plywood class, 1x is the 1x class. So it's, and this is, and I hate that AutoCAD doesn't have the ability to have these 2 different attributes to an object, both class and layer, because I find this organization
Yeah.
so fucking helpful.
Yeah.
It works for my brain so well to be able to split it up like this. So now that I've organized the document in this way, if I'm going into my sheet layers, and I think did I save this with? Yeah, I did. Cool. So let's see what I drafted a couple days ago. There we go. So here's my sheet layer. This is really kind of bullshitty title block. So these are viewports. You've seen them used before. Let me just delete everything I did and start over. So I understand that from Lighting World, you guys are mostly used to actually creating your viewports from your design space, where you'll draw like a bounding box around something in design space and then hit create viewport and then send that to a sheet layer. That is a great way of doing it. I'm going to show you how my organization helps this work a little bit faster for me, in my perspective for this, but please continue to do whatever works for your brain best. So way I prefer to work is I'm under View, Create Viewport right here, and then using this tool right here, I can then select exactly which layers and classes I want. So if I'm plating, I'm going to plate this 4-step unit right here. So I'm going to do a 4-step unit. That's the only layer I want turned on. I can choose visible, invisible, and grayed out for each one. I know that, and this is just experience from being a TD, that the MDF top layer on this step unit is not helpful in terms of plating this unit because it just is going to obscure everything. So I'm going to go to my classes, and I'm going to turn off my 1/4" MDF. I could also gray it, so that way it would just be transparent. And then if I was being super fancy, I could do something like what we showed you guys with the stereo unit, where I could class a whole bunch of like the treads under group them together and put that group in a transparency class, so that way they would look a little bit cooler. Choosing scale, I think about 1.5" is where I landed with this guy. And then I usually start with the front. It defaults to plan. Okay, rendering is, I'm not sure, I'm sorry if this is a lot of review, but so the rendering's a little funky with how this works. So the renderings, the first render mode you select is how you generally want the unit to look on it. So in wireframe rendering, that means the unit's going to look the same way it does in model space with wireframe rendering. So that means if you've got a filled in shape right here, actually, fuck it, let me just show you what it looks like. Let's do it this way, Dan. Okay, so I've got my front view of this unit, and it is rendered in wireframe, which means it's a clusterfuck of lines, and you can't tell what's going on at all. Also note I can choose the drawing title right here, and auto-populates this. These drawing labels are really nice. I like this system.
Yeah.
I always forget to do it in AutoCAD, which means I never know what scale my drawings are once they hit the shop floor.
You're like, oh.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
So I think part of the reason that lighting tends to draw a shape around its thing is the crop of this viewport. It's grabbing everything in that layer, and so the width
Yep.
of whatever.
Yep.
So I think that's why in lighting
Because you guys,
we might have stuff all the way over here that we don't
Exactly.
necessarily want to see and put on another plate.
Exactly, and so
Great.
that's why this is so specific to how I organize
Yeah.
my documents.
I mean, it's great for our
Yeah.
set electrics. I was just trying to figure out, because you always make these viewports, I'm like, it's just that one object. How come I
Mhm.
can't just get the thing? And I'm like, oh, because I have everything everywhere
Yep.
in every layer. Got it.
Yep, exactly. And so once again, do what works best for your brain. So talking rendering, so right now, now I've got options for what's called a background render and a foreground render right here. They just stack on each other. So the background render is going to be underneath whatever the foreground is. So if there's a conflict, the foreground is going to win over the background. So background render, you've got all these options. Most common ones you'll see, I really don't recommend doing wireframe because you have no distinction between what's visible and invisible. If I go right to OpenGL, and then now that I've got this candy cane around the viewport, I need to click here and hit update so that way it's going to re-render it. Okay, cool. So now I'm seeing things as if I was in a front view from OpenGL. If I wanted to be really fancy, I could go into my foreground render and I could choose dashed hidden line. And what's going to do is it's going to display any of the lines that are cut off right now with hidden lines, which it's not.
It's hard to see with the yellow.
Yeah. I might need to look at that. It could be my hidden line classes. All sorts of screwed up side problems with my hatching class as well. Just going over the render styles just so we get all the information. Hidden line doesn't actually show hidden lines. It's kind of the opposite. Hidden line means it hides lines that you're not supposed to see.
Yeah.
So in hidden line like this, it cuts off. It means the same thing in AutoCAD. It's just a little counterintuitive for me, but I need to get over that. And this one's, hidden line is my preferred way for actually units like this right here. I usually don't prefer OpenGL until I get to isometric. So in creating other viewports, I could repeat these same steps again. What I prefer to do is grab my viewport, drag it, hold control so I get the plus sign, grab a new viewport, and then change the view manually. So right now it's front. I'm going to switch to top, and what's going to happen is it's going to project it up to the top end. This viewport's, my prediction is this staircase is going to shoot about 30 feet up at the moment because it's going to lock my annotation in right here, which is frustrating, but I still find it a little bit faster than creating a new viewport manually. Oh, it behaved. Oh no, I need to hit update.
Did it?
Nope.
Goodbye.
Picked wrong.
Oh, wow.
Damn.
It is very far away.
And the reason for this is a symptom of the fact that this is all part of a master file. If this file only had the staircase in it, it wouldn't have done this because it would have just gone to the top of that right here. But because Vectorworks has this intuitive knowledge of all this other shit that exists in model space, that's why, and this is very similar to what Tori was talking about when creating a viewport and it goes all the way into left field.
How do you crop that?
Okay, so the way I fix this is,
Double click.
it just dragged my drawing title. So
God.
one way I can solve this is not have the drawing title when I'm duplicating these. I can actually just click and delete them. I never did that. So this is Dan Movik's inefficient ways. I just click in, grab the annotation object, and then move it back to where it needs to be, which is right down here.
And then just update the viewport.
Yeah, so if
So that's not a crop issue.
No, it isn't. It kind of is, in the fact that it's just, if
Yeah,
we're,
you could crop it and crop out the title.
Yep.
And it would leave the title all the way up there, and you could crop down and just show
Yep.
everything and then make it the title. or you can move the title.
Mhm.
So it's recognizing a symbol, an object, something that
Yep.
this viewport has to.
Yeah,
you will
and
find
Vectorworks
that.
gets confused somehow because this title card exists on the sheet layer at these coordinates, but but because it's looking at the way Vectorworks sees it is I've got this staircase that's all the way back here, and I've got my title right here, and when I say top view, it goes okay.
So
Okay.
it pivots from the viewpoint, not from the object itself.
Yeah, it's a little weird, and it's a little frustrating, but
Mhm.
it's not the end of the world.
Okay.
So this is the primary way I'm used to creating my viewports, and so I would do my top, my left. I'm not going to do a side yet because I want to do a section. We'll get to doing that in just a second. But then I'd also grab the right isometric because it makes my heart happy. And
Once again.
And there it is. Yeah.
Bye.
oh, lost it. So there we go.
Hey, I know what you wanted.
God forbid. So plop this drawing title back in here. I got in the bad habit of removing my drawing titles at a certain point. This gets into the finesse of like how you plate things. It's very much an art form, and I really don't want to impress standards on that, while at the same time I'm showing you exactly how I do it, which is awkward. But as long as your drawings have some sort of label and you can tell the scale on it, that's what we're looking for. As you can see, when I'm moving around, it defaults to putting this into wireframe as soon as it runs out of memory, because wireframe is the least rendering intensive. If you're doing any sort of dimensioning, absolutely have it in wireframe or hidden line before you dimension, before you put it in OpenGL, because OpenGL has the nasty habit of adding extra nodes for the dimension points to grab onto, and you can ruin whole sheets of plywood that way.
Yeah.
Seems like you're
Not in the lighting department.
Actually, I didn't ruin sheets of plywood.
You didn't?
No, but they cut it to what my incorrect dimension line said it was. So.
We just ended up hanging
That
something
wasn't
in
it.
one spot. We should-
I feel for the person.
Cool. So let's talk about some of my favorite features about viewports and Vectorworks. And this is stuff that actually after the summer I went back and found ways of doing this in AutoCAD because I like this so much. The first is what's called the live section view. So I've selected this viewport right here. The way we're taught in AutoCAD to draw a section view is to manually draw a section view, which is project some X lines and then draw squares and add hatches to
And
them.
redraw it.
Yep,
40
which is
times.
fine, but it's slow and I'm lazy. So I've got this viewport selected and I say view, create section viewport. Now I'm going to draw my sectioning line like so. And then I can draw a crazy section line. I could draw like a stair step and all sorts of bullshit like this, and it's going to keep on letting me draw a section line as long as I want to. So I've selected my 2 points that I want, hitting enter, and then it gives me a whole bunch of options for how the section renders and all this nonsense. I'm going to keep it the same for right now because it defaults to the same settings as that viewport. And then I've got a live section view where the parts that should be hatched are hatched, the parts that should be visible are visible, and all this stuff.
That's awesome.
That's
Yeah.
really cool.
It's really handy. And you can do the same thing in AutoCAD. If you ever want me to show you, I will.
We'll get to that.
Yeah.
point.
I finally figured out how to do that. Yeah.
How do you get it to show a specific side of the section?
That
So, yes, when I was drawing
didn't
it,
see the
there was a
arrow.
little arrow that popped up, and it was based off of what side my mouse was on the line. So-
I didn't see that.
So I've got a section view, and it's wunderbar. And you know what, for this one, maybe I'll actually turn back on that MDF. So I'm going to go back to classes and turn on that 1/4 inch MDF. Because this is a really important thing when you're building a staircase, is which side
Tolerance.
caps which.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to make sure that my top caps my sides of MDF. The reason you do that is otherwise actors will always rip off your risers with their
Go
feet
kick it.
every single
Is
time.
there any reason to do it the other way?
There's really
He's
not.
like,
Yeah.
no.
No, no.
Not unless you're an
Unless you
idiot.
just mess up and
Yeah,
you're lazy. Yeah.
what happens is someone builds it in the wrong order.
Yeah.
So this is really important. I want to make a very special note of this capping right here.
Mhm.
But in 1.5 inch scale, I mean, this is barely a 1/16 of an inch. This is really hard for me. I could put a giant call out, or I could do a detail view.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So I need to create a bounding box over what I want a detail of. I prefer circles. Rounded over rectangles are also very visually appealing. I don't prefer 90-degree rectangles, but that is just personal preference on Dan's end. Circles, ovals, ellipses, filleted rectangles, all great.
Anything just to draw your
triangles,
eye.
no,
Yeah.
just don't.
Don't do a triangle.
Pentagrams.
Pentagram over.
Chris Mason, satanic drafting.
Drafting with Satan.
Okay, so
Details.
I've got my circle right here. My circle is not in the annotation layer. My circle is on top of the annotation itself. I have the circle selected. View, create detail viewport, and now it's giving me some options. I can name it. It's creating it on this sheet layer right here, drawing number, drawing title. I can select layers and classes. I could have had my MDF turned off here, but turned on in the detail viewport. Yep, render style. I'm gonna up the scale because it is a detail view. I'm actually gonna go to half scale right here. And then you can always select detail view and with your viewports. If you're sending something off to a client, you up the detail a whole bunch, but you're gonna cry every time you need to update that viewport because it's gonna take forever. So, hit that, and I've got my detail.
Ooh.
A couple of options I like to toggle on it. First of all, crop visible. Actually, that's the main option I like to add toggled on it. And now I can add a call out that makes this really clear. Just in terms of drafting standard-wise, I always like to draw some connecting lines between my circle and my detail view. And if I care a lot, I'm going to make sure that they're really nice and tangenty. But I'm running through this so that way we don't spend 5 minutes watching me try and get lines up to a tangent. So I got this detail view. Let's start talking annotations because this is where we're at. So at this point, since you guys have all done some drawings, you know you can double click, edit annotations or crop. Actually, let me just talk about crop real quick. Even if you've cropped something in model space to create your viewport, you can change it in paper space by hitting change options and crop. If I want to crop something out here that I haven't done before, I draw a bounding box or a bounding circle or a bounding triangle or a bounding rhombus or a bounding satanic pentagram. And when I exit my crop, it crops the viewport out right there. So this is especially handy if you've been drawing something and you've got some sort of you've got some point 10,000 feet off in model space.
That won't shrink.
Yep.
Yeah, because it doesn't show you where the edges are.
Yeah.
So especially if you're impatient and you just want to get it done, this is a great way to kind of clean up something.
Okay.
But I care less about that now. So let me go ahead and delete it. Really should actually should we do a satanic? No, I'm not. I'm waiting for the plating assignments. I see where all the details are.
Actually, I'm gonna have the little goat head there.
Oh, go ahead.
Yes. Put it in your.
So-
in your
That'll be my
Another
label.
thing I really like about Vectorworks Paperspace versus Models Paperspace is the annotations are linked to the annotation object. So if I'm editing annotations right now and I want to add a call out, which is this little guy right here, Alt +1. So make sure if you've got a detailed view, this is important. Make sure your call out is either all the way inside the bubble or all the way outside the bubble. Never both.
No overlapping lines.
And then
What happens?
no, it's nothing bad happens.
It looks bad.
It looks like
It just looks like
It's why you
ass.
set all your boxes to solid fill instead of empty
I
fill
forgot.
because you have lines over letters.
So I'm gonna say MDF risers. MDF treads, cap risers.
Exclamation point.
Ta-da! I've got my little annotation. The same thing works with dimensionings that you guys have experienced before as you're going through and adding dimensions to these viewports. This is not a feature in AutoCAD and it makes me cry every time.
Nothing is more frustrating
Yeah,
to have a
because-
complete done plate and it's like, oh wait, it has some empty space there. Shift everything an inch to the left and all your annotations stay where they're at and they don't shift with the object.
Yep.
that's the word.
You gotta redo all the annotations.
Something some of you guys may or may not know about the dimensions. This is getting more into scatterbrain dance tips and tricks type of stuff. You have the option to change a leader and a trailer. So this is where you add your TYP or your on-center typical in drawings right here. That's how you can tie that into your dimensions in Vectorworks. That exists just outside of it. One thing that I've done a lot with Spring Awakening is we've got a lot of stuff that's actually build to fit. So we've got some other unit that we're actually building something to fit in. I'm telling people to pull the measurements for, but I've also been providing the dimensions of what it should be, so that way they have some sort of reference. And what I've just been doing in front of those dimensions is putting a little squiggly line.
Yeah.
Approximately.
About.
You're looking for something about here, or especially with like toggles that need to be put to fit. It's like about 2 feet on center. I don't give a fuck. Like just
Yeah.
Like just put them where
Yep.
they fit.
But the more typical thing you'd see is like OCTYP, on center typical.
What does that mean?
So what typical means is it's asking your carpenters to have some sort of sense. So if you have a platform and you've got 8 toggles on it, you draw a dimension to your first one and you say a 2 foot 0 on center typical, OCTYP.
So
which
all of them are that?
all of them are 2 foot.
2, 4,
So
6, 8,
by saying
yeah.
this tread is 10 inches typical, I'm saying this tread is 10 and this tread is 10, this tread, and you
They're
have to
all
be
10.
yep. You have to be careful about it because it's tempting to make everything typical, but then you get screwed by the one thing that's not, or some person who assumes that something isn't as other. So like, for instance, on stair treads, your bottom riser and your top tread usually end up being a different dimension.
Mhm.
It didn't in this case, so I usually dimension it that way. Some people would have done something like put 10 right here, and not written typical, but because you've seen this pattern, you just assume it runs like that.
Mhm.
So, buyer's choice when it comes to drafting standards on that. You can absolutely over-dimension it and have fun. Your drawings just end up a cluster of misery. Cool. Let me see. Annotations, dimensions, callouts. Yes, Brian.
How'd you get the circle to do the blow up for the?
For the detail view.
Yeah.
So this circle is the circle that I drew, and then when I clicked on it and hit create detail viewport, it kept this right here, put it in the annotation tab, automatically inserted my drawing label right here, and then it created this view, and this view by default doesn't have the crop visible, and I wanted that to be, which also is a toggleable option if you have a cropped viewport to begin with. You can toggle to have the crop visible, so that way everyone can see your satanic pentagram.
Yeah, I was wondering
Wonderful.
where you get the boxes around the things. I didn't know.
Yep.
That.
Yep, okay. Another thing I want to talk about is the create multiple viewports command. So this is another way of creating some viewports. I'm going to specify right from the start that I really don't like this command, but sometimes it works for people. This works best if you have a drawing with only like one unit on it, not these big complex 3D masters. So I select the drawings, I select the objects I want to be made into a viewport. I hit view, to create multiple viewports, and then it gives me a series of options of what viewports I want to create, which sounds awesome. It's like, okay, I always want my front, top, and side.
1 to 5,000 scale.
Yeah, exactly. Select my scale, 1 inch equals a foot is usually a good place to start off in ArcD. If you're doing the whole set, you're going to go smaller. If you're doing something level up. Okay, what I really, really, really wish this had is a toggleable option for what sheet layer to put it on.
Oh,
And
it
it doesn't. So I'm going to hit OK, and it's going to, 1, create a new sheet layer, and 2, it's going to flip out just because these objects, because of that projection thing. And so these, well, let's see. So sheet 1,
I love it.
That's the very sheet.
it's created a new sheet layer, and the objects are nowhere in sight. So let me go to my zoom extents option. All right, there we go.
Only 500 feet out.
Well, let's actually just for the sake of silliness, let's actually pull a dim on this.
Oh,
Good
no.
luck finding
100? Is that 30?
Oh, 33.
3337. Okay.
But on an 8.5 by 11.
But it's 500 feet off center.
Yeah.
There you go.
Because if you look at your top.
Well, I mean, in half-inch scale, 33 feet, so times
That's
33
a
times
lot.
24.
Oh, yeah,
That's a
there
big
you go.
number.
There you go.
So if you wanted to do it this way, I could then select all these objects, change their layer to the sheet layer that I want them to be on, and then manually drag them inside. It's actually not that much slower than like the shit we've been pulling with like it popping up from that. So it's another option. Cool. And then I think this is actually the last big thing I want to talk about. So this is, I've always been whining about how my Vectorworks files end up being massive. This is why. I like exploded section views, which means I want to look at the side of the object and I want to blow up every single one of my independent things. So for a stair unit, I want to see my treads, and I want to see my carriages, and I want to see my treads separated. I want to see my MDF pieces separated from that. There's software like SolidWorks and Inventor can actually do that without blowing up the object. In Vectorworks we do. So what I did is I already took my step unit and I created a copy of it. I have lots of copies of all my units and all my files. This is why the Moonman file is over 6 gigabytes.
Oh no.
Because there's about 5 Moonman worth of things in it. So here's my identical copy of a layer right here. And then, so this is, I know I'm creating like a dummy section view, so I've got that right there, and I want to select these guys. I'm going to drag them up, good like 6 inches. Let me delete the back layer of MDF. And then what I do is I just drag all these apart so then I could pull a view from the side and have really clean place to call out all these different materials. One of the easy things to forget to do when plating, and I certainly struggle with this with my shop floor drawings, is because everything I've been working in is within the layers, is I forget that once I print it in black and white, it's really hard for someone to tell what the different materials are in an object, and different people have different ways of dealing with that. I usually use a bill of materials in my drawings and call out some things. Ted has a very distinct style where he actually draws little arrows that call out. So he'll have a bunch of arrows that say like A and a bunch of arrows that say B and C, and then I'll actually have a bill of materials on the bottom of the drawing that says, if it says it's A, it's 3/4 CDX plywood. If it says it's B, it's 1x3 pine, yada, yada, yada. Whatever way works for you, works for you. But that's just how you arrive at calling out this material. So like with some of the atomic stuff right here, I actually called out materials in this isometric. This is an LED step unit, so what you're looking at right here, this is a material called Comatex that is used as a reflector with 2 strips of LED on it. The isometric, I call out most of the materials. I subclassed this top layer right here, so that way I could see it. One of the things you'll note is when Vectorworks starts getting a little grumpy, especially if the viewports aren't updated, any detail viewport you're gonna have, Vectorworks still is rendering the rest of the shape right here. So I could be zooming around this object and have this massive staircase that keeps on like popping in and out of existence. That's why. It's because it's rendering the rest of that detail viewport. Let me see. I think on the archway I've got a good exploded section.
I have another question later.
Yeah.
So since you create duplicate layers and stuff, do you ever come across the issue where after you've plated or something, or in the process of plating, you find like an error, and do you have to go back and update both layers then?
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
the extreme hazard of having some sort of like duplicated thing with especially
I've
the
done that,
exploded
and I've
section.
had that problem, but I just
Yep.
didn't know if you had
Yep.
some sort of
So I've got a bunch of viewports that need updating. I can drag and select them and hit view, update multiple viewports. One thing, this is just a pro tip. There's this option here that says update all viewports. That is not all viewports on this sheet layer.
That is all.
That is all,
Like everything.
all viewports.
Got it.
This is, if you ever want to crash Vectorworks, there's a really fast way of
really
doing that.
good way.
Well, only if you have that many viewports.
Well, and especially several of these viewports were for clients, so they are
Yeah.
of the 160 by
Oh
55
my
foot screen
God.
surround
Oh,
in
Jesus.
final quality RenderWorks.
Yeah.
Well, there's also the update selected viewport.
Exactly. And what I love about update selected viewports is it doesn't care if some of your objects aren't viewports.
Okay.
So I can just select the entire fucking page. And this is going to take a minute because some of these are rendered a little funkily, but this was an archway for the Overwatch Grand Finals. So luckily these were all symbols, so none of this was duplicated stuff right here. But this exploded section view right here was I just have it on, and we could probably find that sheet layer. I mean that design layer where I've got the exploded. Let me see. It's been a while since I worked on this document. We can go to the player's desk exploded.
Yeah.
This
player's
is
desk.
gonna make it cry a little bit. There's a lot of LED panels on this. This is the exploded viewport. I thought I had a design layer. Player's desk.
I like a good player's desk. Crash.
Oh no.
Wait, it's fine. That's right. Ooh, look at that.
Oh,
That's
wow.
cool.
So these were LED panels, which are massive symbols in and of their own rights. Nothing to do with this class, but the company that actually made these LED panels actually has subclasses that are less processor-intensive version of these units. So each one of these symbols has like this fully rendered class, and then also has like a class that is literally just like two rectangles, one representing the outermost extremes of the front of it, and one representing the back of it. But this is why my file types end up being so big, is because I love views like this, and there's not a really good way of doing this otherwise. The other way you could do that where you wouldn't have to duplicate this is you could painstakingly create viewports for each individual object that you want to explode, and then have those viewports actually exploded off each other.
Oh, shoot.
That would allow it to update as you update the objects, but takes a little bit of extra work. What questions do you all have? There's a lot of information.
So when you're talking about plating this, I mean, it's a lot of the same thing over and over and over again. Do I need to plate everything, or can I just plate one and say you're building 4?
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Build 4.
let me actually just pass out the assignment. Absolutely. So
Okay.
even so, buyer's choice when it comes to it. Like for the actual headers for Sister Act, those two headers were perfect mirrors of each other. At Atomic, I would have had no qualms about plating one, saying build 2, one as shown, one reverse and repeat. Here, I did not do that because I don't.
You don't trust your carpenters.
Well, we've got a bunch.
Well,
Exactly,
111
we've got a whole bunch of 111 students, and then my master carpenter. This was her second semester in the shop, so.
Yeah.
For the most important scenic unit in the show, I went through the extra effort of plating a second header to have all the dimensions actually in the orientation that they were going to be looking at it in. It's the same reason why, like Mo for the ceiling in Spring Awakening, actually plated the whole thing upside down because that's the orientation the welders were looking at it. So, so this project's a lot of buyer's choice. Once again, only 2 people in here are actually TDs. So I'm not expecting like perfect technical direction decisions, but what we're looking at is you absolutely need to have standard orthographic isometric section and detail viewports to prove that you learned something this class period. Dimensions as needed. This is a hard thing to stipulate exactly how many dimensions you need and what style you need. Absolutely recommend keeping it clean. And there's no way that any of you guys are ever going to actually put on as many dimensions as you should have, because I screw that up every single time. There's always that one dimension that the shop floor really needs that you forgot about.
Pull up the laptop.
But definitely try and be fastidious about that. Absolutely use callouts and notes to detail how to build the unit and your material choice. That doesn't mean you need to go down to the level of like plug in the air hose and then grab a medium crown staple. But some sense of
people.
how these,
Some
if it really needs to be built in a specific order, like staircases need to have the MDF put on them in a specific order. I call that out, I notate that. But also assume that you're actually sending this to a carpentry shop, that if they see one by, they're gonna know they're gluing and stapling it together unless otherwise noted. And then I've just given some suggestions. I really think this is going to end up being about 3 to 4 plates. I don't want to lock you guys into must be these plates with these objects on it. I want to give you some creativity on that. But this is completely off of how I played this for Sister Act. The archway was 4 plates for me. It was 1 plate as this overall view, which is on your drawing itself, which was basically just showing how the unit assembles. Mostly it was just to show off the fact that I modeled it in 3D. 1 plate for the header, but I actually had 2 plates. One was actually mirrored from the other. You could absolutely plate one and say build the other one, reverse and repeat. 1 plate for the legs. For Sister Act, all 4 of the legs were the same. You guys will actually have 2 different styles of legs because you're building out the original design. And then I had just 1 plate for molding details. You could have multiple for any one of these. Split it up as you see fit. Really try and be creative with this project. And then once again, this is not due the week after we get back, but 2 weeks after we get back, the same day as AOS for Spring Awakening. So the Wednesday after spring break is also going to be work period for this.
Oh,
Questions, concerns? Wunderbar.
Wunderbar.
It's probably gonna lose its marbles when I do this.
think you can do that,
Okay,
but I don't
okay.
know. I've never understood the purpose of that. I don't know. Maybe it's some sort of architectural
Well, it's-
interior design thing.
It,
It's
it might be a holdover of before they had sheet layers, because they had viewports before they had sheet layers,
And
so.
Vectorworks, you're trying to create a viewport for the legend.
Because if you like, cause if you sit and create a viewport, it'll let you put it on.
Like I was trying to do some stuff like that.
Uh-huh.
No.
Still, I
would
guess still
import
a lot of
something,
people like
this
to
is on my light
plot
plot
from their
layer.
design layers
So
directly,
put
so.
that layer. And I would start editing things in the
Obviously.
viewport, but then would also edit it on the design layer itself.
Oh.
So it's not two separate.
Deanna
Illegal.
doesn't know.
I was like, oh shit!
I
I
really
need to go
like
back, find the
sheet
autosave,
layers.
and
Once I
delete all my
discovered what
lights.
it is, I